I got married yesterday, and you were not invited.
The words came out of his mouth quiet and sharp, like the flick of a blade. They were not shouted. They were not said in anger. They were spoken with a cold, empty calm that was far more terrifying than any scream. He stood on her porch, the porch where he had scraped his knees as a boy, the porch where she had waited for him to come home from school, and he looked at her as if she were a stranger. "I got married yesterday," he said, his eyes meeting hers without a single spark of warmth. "And you were not invited." For a moment, the world stopped. The sound of a distant car faded away. The chirping of birds in the old oak tree went silent. There was only the ringing in her ears and the face of her son, a face she had known for 28 years, now looking at her with a chilling finality. 28 years of birthday parties, of bedtime stories, of fevers in the night, of proud tears at his graduation. 28 years of being his mother. All of it, every single memory, seemed to crumble into dust and blow away in the space between them. Her mind raced, trying to find a reason, a mistake, something she could fix. But there was nothing. This was not a mistake. This was a decision he had made without her. He had started a new life, the most important day of his life, and he had deliberately built a wall to keep her out. She wanted to ask why. She wanted to scream. She wanted to grab him by the shoulders and ask him what had happened to the little boy who used to hold her hand so tightly, as if she were the only thing keeping him safe in the world. But her throat was tight, and no words would come out. The real trouble, the crack that had grown into this terrible canyon between them, had started 6 months earlier. It began not with anger, but with grief. When her husband, the man who had been her rock and her partner for over 30 years, passed away, their small, happy world was broken. He was the center of their family, a quiet, steady presence that held them all together. After he was gone, there was just an empty space, a silence that neither she nor her son knew how to fill. For weeks they moved through the motions. They were united in their sadness, sharing memories and leaning on each other. She thought, perhaps, that this tragedy would bring them even closer. She believed that he, her son, was all she had left, and she was all he had left. They would get through it together. That is what families do, but grief can do strange things to people. And when the will was read, the first small crack appeared. Her husband had been a careful man. He had worked hard his entire life to build a comfortable future for his family. He had left everything behind for them. The house, his savings, a small portfolio of investments. It was a generous inheritance, enough to ensure that both she and her son would be secure for the rest of their lives. Her son, Leo, was 28 years old. He had a good job, but he had big dreams. He wanted to start his own business, to buy a house with the woman he loved, the woman he would eventually marry. The inheritance, he saw, was his key to that future. It was the start he needed. He came to her one afternoon, his eyes full of plans and excitement. He wanted to access his portion of the money. It was his, after all. His father had left it to him. She looked at her son, the man he had become, and her heart ached. She knew what her husband had wanted. She knew the careful plans he had made, the worries he had kept to himself. She knew there were conditions, rules that had to be followed. But she could not bring herself to explain them, not yet. It was too soon, the grief was still too raw, so she did the only thing she could think to do. She said no. She tried to be gentle. "Leo, it's not the right time," she had told him, her voice soft. "We need to wait. Your father's affairs are complicated." He did not understand. He saw her hesitation not as caution, but as control. He saw her gentle refusal as a betrayal. "What do you mean, it's not the right time?" he had asked, his voice losing its warmth. "It's my money. Dad left it for me. I need it to start my life." That was the first argument. It was not the last. Over the next few months, the arguments became more frequent and more bitter. His requests became demands. Her refusals became colder. He accused her of trying to steal his future, of holding on to a past that was gone. He believed she was selfish, a grieving widow who couldn't bear to let go of her husband's money. She, in turn, could not understand why he was in such a hurry, why he couldn't see that she was only trying to protect him. Every time he pushed, she pulled away. Every time he demanded answers, she gave him silence. She was trying to follow her husband's last wishes, a promise she had made to him on his deathbed. But in keeping that promise, she was breaking her son's heart. The phone calls started to end with shouting. Then they started to end with one of them hanging up. Soon, the phone calls stopped altogether. He sent angry text messages, paragraphs long, filled with accusations and pain. She read them with tears in her eyes, but never knew how to reply. What could she say? The truth was a bomb, and she was terrified to light the fuse. She believed that if she told him the whole story, it would destroy him far more than any argument about money ever could. So she said nothing, and her silence was the thing that damned her. In his mind, her silence was proof of her guilt. He saw a mother who didn't trust him, a mother who was putting money before her own son's happiness. He could not see the quiet agony she was in, the terrible secret she was carrying all by herself. How does a family, built on a foundation of 3 decades of love, collapse into ruins in just 6 months? How does a son look at the mother who raised him and see an enemy? The answer was not about money. It was never about the money. The answer was a secret born on a dark, rainy Monday so many years ago. A secret that was supposed to keep him safe, to give him a life of love and security. But secrets are not walls that protect, they are cages. And the door to this cage was about to be blown wide open, destroying everything she had ever built. Back on the porch, the silence stretched on. Leo looked down at his shoes, then back at her face, his expression unreadable. He had delivered his blow. He had said the words he came to say. He had drawn a line in the sand, separating his new life from his old one, separating his future from her. He had gotten married, and she was not there. He took a small step back, a final physical act of separation. He turned, his back now facing the woman who had spent 28 years loving him more than life itself. He started to walk down the stone path, away from the house he grew up in, away from her. Each step was like a hammer blow to her heart. He was leaving. He was really leaving. And she knew in that gut-wrenching moment that if she let him walk away now, without telling him the truth, she might lose him forever. To understand how a family could break, you must first understand how it was built. And the family of Sarah, David, and Leo was not built on blood. It was built on a prayer, a promise, and a cold, rainy Monday morning. Long before Leo, there was just Sarah and David. They had met in their early 20s, 2 people who fit together so perfectly it felt like the universe had designed them for each other. Sarah was bright and full of laughter, a woman who saw the good in everyone. David was her anchor. He was quiet, steady, and thoughtful, with a gentle strength that made her feel safe. Their love was the simple, uncomplicated kind. They were best friends who promised to spend the rest of their lives together, and for years that promise was enough. They bought a small house with a big yard, imagining it filled with the sounds of children. They painted a spare room, a cheerful shade of yellow, waiting for the day it would become a nursery. But that day never came. Year after year, the yellow room stayed empty. The silence in their house grew louder with every friend who announced a pregnancy, with every baby shower they attended with smiling faces and aching hearts. The doctors had no easy answers. They just said it was unlikely, a cruel trick of biology that couldn't be explained or fixed. The struggle wore on them, chipping away at Sarah's bright spirit and putting lines of worry on David's face. Their dream of a family, once so clear and certain, began to feel like a ghost that haunted their quiet home. They had so much love to give, but it had nowhere to go. Then came the rainy Monday. It was a miserable grey morning. The kind of day where the sky seems to weep without end. They were driving to work, the windshield wipers swishing back and forth in a tired rhythm. They were late and they were quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. That's when Sarah saw it. A bundle of blankets tucked inside a cardboard box, left on the wet grass by the side of the road. "David, stop the car," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He pulled over, confused. At first, he thought it was just trash, a pile of discarded rags. But Sarah was already out of the car, running through the rain. As she got closer, she heard a sound, a tiny, helpless cry. Almost swallowed by the drumming of the rain, she knelt down and pulled back the damp blanket. And there he was, a a perfect, beautiful baby boy, his face red from the cold and his tiny fists clenched. In that instant, everything changed. The years of sadness, of empty rooms and unanswered prayers, they all melted away. She looked at this tiny, abandoned child, and she didn't see a stranger. She saw her son. David came up behind her, his breath catching in his throat. He saw the look on his wife's face, the protective way she was shielding the baby from the rain, and he knew. This was not a choice. This was fate. They wrapped him in David's warm coat, and without another word, they drove not to work, but home. They named him Leo because he was a fighter, a little lion who had survived the storm. The authorities were called, and a search was made for his parents, but no one ever came forward. He was a child of the rain, a gift from the storm. And after a few months, when it was clear that no one was looking for him, Sarah and David were allowed to legally adopt him. The yellow room was no longer empty. Their house was finally filled with sound. From that day forward, they made a silent pact. They would never tell Leo how he came to them. They were not just his parents, they were his saviors, and they wanted to protect him from the truth of that first cold morning. They didn't want him to ever feel unwanted, to ever think that he was a child someone had thrown away. In their hearts, he wasn't adopted. He was theirs. He had always been meant for them, and he had simply taken a different path to find his way into their arms. Life with Leo was everything they had ever dreamed of. He was a happy child, full of energy and curiosity. David taught him how to ride a bike in the same big yard where they had once imagined him playing. Sarah read him bedtime stories every single night, her voice the gentle soundtrack to his childhood. They were a perfect triangle of love. Sarah was the heart, David was the strength, and Leo was the joy that held them all together. Of course, there were close calls. Once, on the playground, another child asked Leo why his eyes were brown when his parents were blue. Leo, only 6 years old, had simply shrugged and run off to play. But Sarah and David had exchanged a quick, worried look over his head. That night, after Leo was asleep, they reaffirmed their promise. The secret was a shield to protect him, and they would hold it up for as long as they lived. David, ever the planner, worried about the future. He wanted to make sure Leo was always taken care of, that he would have every advantage in life. He worked tirelessly, saving and investing, building a small fortune not for himself, but for his son. He wanted Leo to have the freedom to chase his dreams without worry. But he also wanted Leo to be a man of character, to understand the value of hard work and family. He saw Leo's ambition, but he also saw his impatience. He loved his son fiercely, but he knew that one day Leo would have to face the world on his own. The years passed in a happy blur of school plays, family vacations, and holiday dinners. Leo grew from a curious boy into a confident young man. He was smart, driven, and he loved his parents with all his heart. He never had any reason to doubt who he was or where he came from. He was Leo, the beloved son of Sarah and David. His world was solid, his foundation firm. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet was built on a loving 28-year-old lie, and that the single thread holding it all together was about to snap. For a few weeks after David's funeral, the grief was a blanket that held Sarah and Leo together. They were a team of two, navigating a world that felt empty and wrong. They shared meals in a kitchen that was too quiet and told stories about the man they both loved, his laughter echoing in their memories. In those moments, Sarah believed they would be okay. She looked at her son, now the man of the house, and felt a surge of pride and love. He was David's legacy. He was her future. But grief is not a straight line. It is a twisting, unpredictable path. And Leo was walking his path with someone else by his side, his fiancée, Chloe. She was a kind woman, ambitious and modern, and she loved Leo deeply. But she had not known David for 30 years. She did not understand the deep, unspoken promises that held their family together. All she saw was the man she loved, hurting and uncertain about his future, and she wanted to help him build a new one. The idea started as a whisper between them, a new beginning, a way to move forward from the sadness. They talked about buying a house, about starting a business, a dream Leo and his father had often discussed. The inheritance was not just money to them. It was a symbol. It was David's blessing, the final gift from a father to his son, meant to launch him into the next chapter of his life. Filled with this new sense of purpose, Leo went to his mother. He found her in the garden, tending to the roses David had planted. He was gentle at first, his voice full of hope. He laid out his plans with Chloe, the business proposal, the listing for a small house on the other side of town. He explained that he needed his inheritance to make it all happen. He wasn't asking for a handout. He was asking for what his father had wanted for him. Sarah listened, her hands still in the soil. Every word he spoke was like a small stone hitting her heart. He was talking about moving forward, but all she could hear was him moving away. And she knew, with a certainty that made her feel cold, that he wasn't ready. Not because he was irresponsible, but because he didn't know the whole truth. David's last wish was clear. The truth had to come first. "Leo, it's too soon," she said, her voice barely audible. She couldn't look at him. If she saw the hope in his eyes, she knew she would break. "We can't touch anything for a while. There are legal matters, taxes. It's complicated." It was a weak excuse, and they both knew it. Leo's face fell. The excitement drained away, replaced by confusion. Complicated how? Dad's lawyer said everything was straightforward. What aren't you telling me? And so it began, the first crack. Sarah retreated into a fortress of silence, and Leo began to see her not as his loving mother, but as an obstacle. He would call, and the conversation would always find its way back to the money. His voice would grow tight with frustration. Her voice would grow faint with the weight of the secret she was carrying. He saw a mother clinging to the past, afraid to be left alone. She saw a son who was rushing toward a future he wasn't prepared for, a future that could be destroyed by the truth she was hiding. They were looking at the same picture, but seeing two completely different things. Neither of them could understand the other's point of view. It's a situation with no easy answer. A mother trying to protect her son, and a son trying to build his own life. If you've ever felt stuck in a family disagreement that seemed impossible to solve, drop a comment below with the city you're watching from. You are definitely not alone. The final explosive argument happened on a Sunday afternoon. Leo had come over unannounced, with a folder of bank statements and legal documents he had gotten from his father's lawyer. He laid them out on the kitchen table where he used to do his homework as a child. "There's nothing complicated here, Mom," he said, his voice hard. "It's all here in black and white. Half of this is mine. Chloe and I lost the house we wanted because we couldn't make the down payment. We lost it because you wouldn't let me have what is rightfully mine." "It's not about what's right, Leo. It's about what's best," she pleaded, her hands trembling. "You have to trust me. Your father wanted you to wait." That was the wrong thing to say. Leo's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't you dare speak for him," he snapped. "Don't you dare use his memory to control me. He would have wanted me to be happy. He would have wanted me to build a life with the woman I love. You're the one who is disrespecting his wishes, not me." Her heart shattered. He had never spoken to her like that before. The little boy who had looked at her with such adoration was gone. In his place was a hurt, angry man who saw her as the enemy. "You don't understand," she whispered, tears finally streaming down her face. "No," he said, shaking his head as he gathered his papers. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I think for the first time, I finally do understand." He walked to the door and paused, his hand on the knob without turning around. "I'm done asking," he said, his voice cold and final. "I'm going to live my life, with or without your blessing, with or without you." And then he walked out, closing the door behind him. The click of the latch echoed through the silent house, a sound that marked the end of their family as she knew it. Sarah sank into the chair, the weight of her secret finally crushing her. She had tried so hard to protect him, and in doing so, she had pushed him away forever, and that is when he disappeared from her life, leaving only a devastating silence behind. The drive to his home was a blur of red taillights and angry circular thoughts. Leo gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, replaying the argument with his mother over and over in his head. The sight of her face, crumbling in tears, should have given him pause, should have triggered some deep-seated instinct to comfort her. Instead, it felt like a tactic, a last-ditch effort to make him feel guilty. The final quiet click of the front door closing behind him had felt less like an ending and more like a declaration of war. He had drawn his line, and she had refused to cross it. In his mind, the blame was clear. It rested squarely on her. He walked into his apartment to find Chloe arranging takeout on their small coffee table, her face a mixture of hope and anxiety. The moment she saw his expression, she knew. Her hopeful smile faltered. "It didn't go well," she stated, her voice soft. It wasn't a question. Leo threw his keys onto the counter with a clatter that made them both jump. "That's the understatement of the century," he said, pacing the small living room like a caged animal. He began to recount the entire conversation, his words tumbling out in a torrent of frustration. He told her about the weak excuses, the pleas to trust her, the way she had invoked his father's memory as a shield. As he spoke, he wasn't just telling Chloe what happened, he was cementing his own version of the truth. He was building a case against his own mother, and with every word, the walls of his argument grew stronger and more impenetrable. Chloe listened patiently, her brow furrowed with concern. She came over and wrapped her arms around him, a gesture of solidarity that felt like a lifeline. "I don't understand her, Leo," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Why would she do this? She knows what this means to us. It's like she wants to keep you stuck in the past, like she's afraid of being left alone." Her words were like gasoline on a fire. That was it. That had to be it. His mother wasn't being malicious, she was just being selfish, consumed by her own grief and fear. It was a simpler, more palatable explanation than the alternative, that his mother, the woman who had devoted her life to him, had some hidden, cruel reason for sabotaging his happiness. This narrative, the story of a lonely widow clinging too tightly to her only son, was one he could understand. It made him feel less like a victim of betrayal and more like the adult in the room, the one who had to make a tough decision for his own future. The next morning, armed with this new sense of clarity, Leo decided to take matters into his own hands. His first call was to his father's lawyer, Mr. Harris, a kind, elderly man who had handled the family's affairs for decades. Leo was polite but firm. He explained the situation, framing it as a simple misunderstanding he was trying to clear up. "Mr. Harris," Leo said, his voice steady, "my mother seems to be under the impression that there are complications with my father's estate. I've seen the documents and everything appears to be in order. I was hoping you could just confirm for me that my portion of the inheritance is accessible." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Harris cleared his throat. "Leo," he began, his voice laced with a professional caution that set Leo's teeth on edge. "Your father was a very meticulous man. His instructions regarding his estate were very specific. I've discussed them with your mother, and she understands the process." "What process?" Leo pressed, his frustration mounting. "What specific instructions? Am I not entitled to know what they are? It's my inheritance." "Of course you are," Mr. Harris said smoothly, but the vagueness remained. "However, these are sensitive family matters, and your father entrusted your mother to handle the execution of his final wishes. I really can't discuss the particulars without her consent. My advice, son, is to talk to her. I'm sure she can explain everything." Leo hung up the phone, his hand trembling with rage. It was a conspiracy. The lawyer was siding with her, hiding behind a wall of legal jargon and professional courtesy. He felt like a child, being told to go and ask his mother for permission. The conversation had done nothing but confirm his suspicions. His mother was in complete control, and she was actively working to keep him in the dark. Meanwhile, in the house where Leo grew up, Sarah was living in a world of suffocating silence. The house had never felt so large, so empty. Every room held a memory of Leo, of David, of the life they had built. She would find herself standing in the doorway of his old bedroom, the bed still made, a few of his high school trophies collecting dust on a shelf. She would pick up a framed photo from the mantelpiece, a family portrait from a vacation years ago, all three of them tanned and smiling, a perfect picture of happiness. She would trace Leo's face with her finger and whisper, "What do I do, David? How can I tell him without breaking him?" She tried to reach out. She sent texts that were carefully worded, stripped of any emotion that could be misinterpreted as manipulation. Leo, please call me. We need to talk. It's not what you think. The messages remained unread, a stark blue tick on her screen serving as a constant reminder of the wall he had built between them. She knew she was losing him with every passing day of silence, but the thought of speaking the truth out loud was paralyzing. The secret had been a part of her for 28 years. It was so deeply woven into the fabric of her identity as a mother that she didn't know how to untangle it. To tell him the truth felt like admitting her entire life with him had been based on a lie. Back at his apartment, stewing in his anger and frustration, Leo decided on a new plan. If the lawyer wouldn't talk and his mother would only offer silence, he would find the answers himself. He still had a key to his childhood home. One afternoon, when he knew his mother was out at her weekly grocery run, he let himself in. The house was exactly as he remembered, yet it felt alien, haunted. He went straight to his father's office, a room that had always been a sanctuary of calm and order. He began to search, his movements methodical and quiet. He went through the filing cabinet, pulling out folders labeled finances, insurance, investments. It was all there, just as the lawyer had said, a clear and organized record of his father's life. But there was nothing about any special conditions, no hidden clauses in the will. He felt a surge of validation. He was right. His mother was lying. Then, in the bottom drawer of his father's desk, tucked away beneath old tax returns, he found a small locked wooden box. He remembered this box. His father used to call it his box of important thoughts. He found the small key in its usual hiding spot, taped to the underside of the desk. With a click, he opened it. Inside were a few old photographs, his father's military service medals, and a stack of letters tied with a simple ribbon. They were letters from his father to his mother, written over the years. His heart pounded. This felt like a violation of their privacy, but he pushed the feeling down. He was searching for the truth. He untied the ribbon and began to read. Most were love letters from their early years of marriage, filled with sweet nothings and plans for the future. Then he found one written on the occasion of his own 10th birthday. He recognized his father's neat, careful handwriting. He began to read, and a few lines jumped out at him, searing themselves into his brain. "Sarah, my love," his father had written, "watching Leo blow out his candles today, I felt such an overwhelming sense of pride. He is a wonderful boy. He has your fire, your spirit. But he also has my impatience. I see him rushing toward the future, so eager to grow up. I worry sometimes that he doesn't yet understand the weight of responsibility. We must always guide him and make sure he is truly ready before the world places its burdens upon his shoulders. He needs our protection, now more than ever." That was it. There it was. The proof. His father had seen him as impatient, as not ready for responsibility. And his mother was now using this old, private thought as a weapon, as her justification for holding his life hostage. It wasn't about a grand, protective secret. It was about a simple, insulting lack of faith in him. They had always seen him as a child, a reckless boy who needed their protection. He didn't need to read anymore. He carefully placed the letter back, retied the ribbon, and locked the box, putting it back exactly where he found it. He walked out of the house with a cold, hard certainty in his heart. The confusion was gone, replaced by a deep, aching sense of betrayal that cut far deeper than any argument about money. That evening, he sat down and composed a long, final message to his mother. He didn't text it. He wrote it as an email, the subject line simply reading, "I know." He told her he had been to the house. He told her he had found the letters. He quoted his father's words back to her, the words about his impatience, about his need for protection. "So this was your great, complicated reason," he wrote. "This whole time, you've been treating me like a child, because that's all you've ever seen me as. Dad might have written those words 18 years ago, but you're still living by them. You never trusted me. You never believed I could stand on my own 2 feet. The money was just your way of keeping control. Well, you don't have to worry anymore. I'm taking back control of my own life." He hit send. On the other side of town, Sarah was sitting in her quiet living room when her phone chimed with a new email notification. She saw the subject line and her blood ran cold. She opened it and began to read. With every word, the color drained from her face. He had found the letter, but he had twisted its meaning into the most painful interpretation possible. He had taken his father's love and concern and turned it into an indictment of his character. Her plan to protect him had backfired in the most catastrophic way imaginable. She hadn't just pushed him away, she had given him the very proof he needed to justify hating her. Leo didn't expect a reply to his email, and he didn't get one. The silence from his mother's end was confirmation enough. He had exposed her secret, her petty, controlling motive, and she had nothing left to say. There was a grim satisfaction in that, a sense of having won a bitter, exhausting war. He had his answer, and though it hurt, the clarity was a relief. He and Chloe could finally move on, free from the drama and the manipulation. They would build their life on their own terms, proving to his mother and to the ghost of his father's doubts that he was more than capable. He was not the impatient boy they believed him to be. He was a man. So he made a decision. He and Chloe had been engaged for nearly a year, their wedding plans constantly pushed aside by the family turmoil and financial uncertainty. Now, with a new sense of defiant purpose, Leo decided they would wait no longer. They didn't need a big wedding. They didn't need his family's money. All they needed was each other. In a burst of spontaneity, they went to the courthouse. It was a simple, quiet affair, with two of their friends as witnesses. There were no flowers, no fancy dinner, just two people making a promise to face the world together. It was their first act as a team, a definitive step away from the life Leo had known and into the one they would create for themselves. The day after, he stood on his mother's porch. He hadn't planned it. He had woken up that morning with a strange mix of happiness and a hollow ache he couldn't quite name. He told himself he was going there for closure. He needed to look her in the eye and deliver the news himself, to show her that her control over him was truly broken. He needed to make the final cut, clean and decisive. There was no anger left, he told himself, only a cold, detached sense of finality. And so he delivered the words, the 12 words that he had practiced in his mind all morning.
I got married yesterday, and you were not invited.
He watched her face, expecting to see shock, perhaps anger, maybe even a flicker of regret. But what he saw was something else entirely. He saw a devastation so profound it seemed to pull all the light from her eyes. It was a pain that went far beyond a mother being excluded from her son's wedding. It was the look of a person whose entire world was collapsing inward, and he was the one who had kicked out the final support beam. For the first time, a sliver of doubt pierced his armor of certainty. Sarah felt the world tilt on its axis. The words echoed in the silence, each one a separate crushing blow. He was married. Her son, her little boy, was married, and she had missed it. She had missed the most important day of his life. In her desperate, misguided attempt to protect him, she had inflicted the deepest wound imaginable. She saw him standing there, a man she barely recognized, his face set like stone. He was about to turn and walk away, not just from her porch, but from her life. She knew with a terrifying clarity that this was her last chance. The promise she had made to David, the secret she had guarded for 28 years, what was it all worth if it cost her her son? The bomb she had been so afraid to detonate was going to go off one way or another. Either she could let him walk away and have it destroy them from a distance, or she could light the fuse herself and face the explosion head-on. "Leo, wait," she said, her voice raspy, desperate. It was the first thing she had said, and the word hung in the air between them, fragile but strong enough to make him pause. He stopped, his back still to her. He didn't turn around. "There's nothing left to say," he said, his voice flat. "There is," she insisted, taking a shaky step toward him. "There's everything left to say. You're wrong, Leo. You're so wrong about everything. The letter you found, it wasn't what you think. Your father's fears. They weren't about your impatience. They were about this. About the truth." He turned around slowly, a cynical, weary look on his face. "The truth. I know the truth. The truth is, you never thought I was good enough. You never trusted me." "No." The word burst out of her, a raw, primal cry. Tears were now streaming freely down her face, but she didn't bother to wipe them away. "That's not it. You have to listen to me. Please, just listen." There was something in her voice, a raw agony that finally broke through his defenses. He saw not a manipulator, but a woman in unbearable pain. He remained silent, his arms crossed, his expression still guarded, but he didn't walk away. He was listening. She took a deep breath, the air shuddering in her lungs. This was it. The moment she had dreaded for 28 years. The words felt foreign in her mouth, like a language she had never spoken before. "The day your father died," she began, her voice trembling, "I made him a promise. He made me promise that I would tell you the truth before you received your inheritance. He said you had to know who you were before you could decide who you were going to be. He was so afraid that the truth would break you." Leo's frown deepened. "The truth about what? That you thought I was a reckless kid?" "I've already figured that out." Sarah shook her head, a single violent motion. "No, Leo. Not that." She looked him directly in the eye, and the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. "The truth about the day we found you." The words landed in the air and hung there, nonsensical. "Found me," Leo repeated, a confused, hollow echo. "What are you talking about? I was born in St. Mary's Hospital. You've told me the story 100 times. Her heart broke all over again. The story she had told him, the beautiful lie she had crafted about a sunny afternoon, and the joy of his birth. It all felt like a cruel deception now. "That story wasn't true," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We made it up to protect you." She began to speak, and the story of that rainy Monday morning spilled out of her, 28 years of secrets pouring forth in a torrent of grief and love. She told him about the years of infertility, the empty yellow room, the ache in their hearts that never went away. She told him about the miserable grey morning, the drive to work, the bundle of blankets on the side of the road. She described the cardboard box, the damp chill in the air, the sound of his tiny, helpless cry. She described the overwhelming, instantaneous love she felt, the certainty that he was meant to be her son. Leo stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. Every word she spoke was a chisel, chipping away at the foundation of his entire life. He was not the cherished, planned-for child of Sarah and David. He was a foundling, an abandoned baby left in a box. The story was so absurd, so melodramatic, it had to be a lie. A desperate, crazy lie from a woman trying to win back her son. "You're lying," he said, the words coming out in a choked whisper. "You're making this up. Why would you say something so horrible?" "Because it's the truth," she cried, taking another step closer. "David and we loved you more than anything in this world, Leo. From the second we saw you, you were our miracle. We never wanted you to feel unwanted. We never wanted you to think for a single second that someone had just thrown you away. So we created a new story, a better story, a story where you were always ours." He was shaking his head, his hands covering his ears as if he could block out the words. "No, no, no, no." The world was spinning, the porch beneath his feet feeling unsteady, the face of his father, the sound of his mother's voice, every memory he had, was suddenly cast in a new, strange light. The fact that he didn't look like them, the vague answers they gave when he asked about family history, the worried looks they shared, it all started to click into place, a horrifying puzzle he had never even known he was a part of. "Why?" he finally managed to ask, his voice raw with pain. "Why tell me now?" "Because of the inheritance, Leo," she said, her voice soft and full of sorrow. "That's the secret. That's the part you don't know. Your father's will. It has a condition, a clause. He specified that you could only receive the money after you were told the truth of your story. He didn't want you to find out by accident one day, from some old document or a slip of the tongue. He wanted you to hear it from me. He believed that the money wasn't just for a house or a business. It was for your future, and he believed you couldn't build a real future until you knew the truth about your past." The anger drained out of Leo, replaced by a vast, cold emptiness. His rage, his resentment, his sense of betrayal. It had all been a terrible, tragic misunderstanding. His mother hadn't been trying to control him. She had been trapped, caught between a promise to her dead husband and her love for her son, trying to figure out how to detonate a bomb without destroying everything in the blast zone. He had accused her of selfishness, of cruelty, when in reality she had been carrying a burden for him his entire life. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. He saw the deep lines of grief and worry on her face. He saw the endless love in her tear-filled eyes. He saw the woman who had found him on a cold, rainy day and had chosen to be his mother. And he saw the man he had been for the past 6 months, a cruel, angry son who had repaid a lifetime of love with suspicion and contempt. The weight of his own actions crashed down on him, and it was a far heavier burden than any secret she had ever kept. The porch was silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the cold, empty space of anger and misunderstanding. It was a heavy, sacred silence filled with the weight of a truth that had finally been spoken. Leo felt as though he were floating, disconnected from his own body. The world he had known just moments before, a world where he was the wronged son, the victim of his mother's control, had been shattered into a million pieces. Now, standing in the rubble, he didn't know who he was. His entire identity had been a story, a beautiful, comforting story, but a story nonetheless. He was not Leo, the biological son of Sarah and David. He was Leo, the baby in the box. A child someone had left behind. The one word he had never associated with himself now screamed in his mind: unwanted. His mother had spent 28 years building a fortress of love to protect him from that single devastating word, and in his ignorance he had spent the last 6 months tearing it down stone by stone. I don't know what to say, he stammered, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. He looked at his mother, at the woman who was, and was not, his mother. The conflict was a physical ache in his chest. He wanted to run, to escape the crushing weight of this new reality, but he also felt an overwhelming urge to fall into her arms, like he had done as a child when he was hurt or scared. Sarah saw the war in his eyes. She saw his confusion, his pain, and his shame. She took a tentative step forward and gently placed a hand on his arm. Her touch was warm, familiar, and it anchored him. "You don't have to say anything, Leo," she said softly. "I know this is a shock. I know I should have told you sooner. I was a coward. I was so afraid of this moment, so afraid of losing you that I almost did." He finally met her gaze, and his own eyes filled with tears. "I was so cruel to you," he whispered, his voice thick with regret. "Everything I said, everything I thought, I was so wrong." "You were hurt," she replied, her voice filled with a mother's forgiveness. "And you were grieving. You were trying to make sense of a world that didn't make sense anymore. I didn't give you the truth, so you made up your own. I can't blame you for that." He wanted to believe her, but the guilt was a bitter taste in his mouth. He thought about Chloe, his wife. He had married her under a false name, a false history. He had brought her into a family whose very foundation was a secret. He had to go to her. He had to tell her. He pulled away from his mother's touch, his mind a chaotic whirl. "I have to go," he said, turning away. I need to think." Sarah didn't try to stop him. She simply nodded, her expression full of a painful understanding. "I'll be here," she said, "whenever you're ready." Leo drove, but he didn't go home. He drove to the one place that felt real, the one place that held an undeniable truth: the cemetery. He stood before his father's grave, the polished granite cold and impassive. He had stood here 6 months ago, a son mourning his father. Now he stood here as a stranger. "You should have told me," he said to the gravestone, the words swallowed by the wind. "You both should have told me." He spent hours there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, trying to piece together the fragments of his life. The father who had taught him to be honest and upfront had kept the biggest secret of all. But why? The inheritance clause was a part of it, but it felt deeper than that. His father, the meticulous planner, must have had a reason for everything. The letter he had found, the one he had so horribly misinterpreted, now seemed different. He needs our protection, now more than ever. His father hadn't been protecting him from impatience or irresponsibility. He had been protecting him from this, from the pain he was feeling right now. When he finally went home, Chloe was waiting, her face etched with worry. "Leo, what happened? Your mother called me. She was crying. She said you two had talked. Is everything okay?" He sat down on the edge of their bed and, in a low, halting voice, he told her everything. He told her the story of the rainy Monday, of the cardboard box, of the 28-year-old secret. He watched her face as he spoke, expecting to see shock, maybe even pity. Chloe listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief, and finally to a deep, profound empathy. When he finished, she didn't say, "I'm so sorry." She simply moved closer, took his hand and said, "She saved your life, Leo." They both did. Her simple, unwavering acceptance was the first ray of light in his dark, confusing world. He had been so focused on the lie that he had failed to see the incredible truth at its core. He was a child who had been chosen, a child who had been saved, a child who was loved so fiercely that his parents had built an entire world just for him. The next morning, Leo knew what he had to do. He went back to his mother's house. This time, when she opened the door, there was no anger or distance between them. He simply opened his arms, and she stepped into his embrace. They held each other for a long time, a silent apology and a promise of forgiveness passing between them. "I want to see the will," Leo said when they finally separated. "I need to understand what Dad was thinking." Together, they went to Mr. Harris's office. The old lawyer greeted them with a look of gentle relief. He laid the thick document on his conference table. He turned to a specific page, marked with a tab. There, in clear legal language, was the clause they had discussed. It stated that the full inheritance would be transferred to Leo upon the condition that he had been made fully aware of the circumstances of his adoption. But that wasn't all. As Leo continued to read, his eyes landed on a final paragraph, a personal addendum written in his father's own hand. His breath caught in his throat. "My dearest Leo," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means you now know the whole story. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive your mother and me for the secret we kept. We did it not to deceive you, but to give you a childhood free from the shadow of abandonment. But I knew a day would come when you would be strong enough to bear the truth. And I needed you to know it, not just for your own sake, but for hers." Leo looked up, confused. "For hers? For whose?" Sarah looked just as baffled. Mr. Harris pointed to the next line. "I have made a second provision. Upon my death, my private investigator, who has continued his work for the past 28 years, will release his final findings. I never stopped looking for your birth mother, son. I owed it to you to try. But I also owed it to the memory of the woman who left you to find out if she was okay." Leo's world, which had just begun to settle, tilted violently once more. A private investigator. For 28 years. His father had been searching for his biological mother his entire life. Mr. Harris slid a thick manila envelope across the table. "The investigator's final report arrived last week," he said softly. "As per David's instructions, it was only to be opened by you, Leo, and only after you knew the truth." Leo's hands trembled as he reached for the envelope. This was the final twist, the last secret his father had kept. He had thought the revelation of his adoption was the end of the story. But he was wrong. It was only the beginning. Inside that envelope was the answer to a question he had never even known to ask. Who was he, really? And who was the woman who had left him by the side of a road on a cold, rainy Monday morning? He looked at Sarah, whose face was a mask of stunned disbelief. She had known nothing about this. This was David's secret alone. And now the truth was in his hands. The manila envelope lay on the polished mahogany table, a silent, unassuming object that held the power to rewrite Leo's life for the second time in as many days. It felt impossibly heavy in his hands. He looked at his mother, Sarah, whose eyes were wide with a mixture of shock and a dawning, painful understanding. All those years, all those late nights David had spent in his office, the long, unexplained phone calls she had assumed were about work, it had been this. A secret search, a hidden mission he had carried out alone, right under her nose. It wasn't a betrayal, but it was a secret nonetheless. Another layer in the complex life of the man she thought she knew completely. "I didn't know," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "He never said a word." "He was trying to protect you both," Mr. Harris said gently. "I think he was afraid of what he might find. And perhaps afraid of what he wouldn't." Leo's fingers fumbled with the metal clasp on the envelope. A part of him wanted to slide it back across the table, to leave it unopened and walk away. He had a mother. The only mother he had ever known was sitting right beside him. What good could come from inviting a ghost from the past into their already fractured lives? But another, stronger part of him knew he couldn't walk away. His father had spent nearly 3 decades and a small fortune searching for this truth. It was his final gift, his last act as a father. To ignore it would be the ultimate act of disrespect. With a deep breath, he opened the envelope. Inside was a thick report, bound in a simple blue cover. The title on the front was stark: Case File 784, Unidentified Infant. He opened it, and the first thing he saw was a photograph, a grainy black and white copy of a hospital photograph of him as a newborn. He had never seen it before. Below it were the sparse details of his discovery: the date, the time, the location by the side of the road. He began to read, his eyes scanning the pages of dry professional prose. The report detailed 28 years of painstaking work. The investigator had followed every possible lead. He had checked hospital records for miles around, searching for a young woman who had given birth and then disappeared. He had interviewed police officers, now long retired, who had worked the original case. He had chased down rumors and false leads, traveling to different towns, following whispers of a scared teenage girl who had run away from home. For years the trail was cold. There were dead ends, missing records, and the simple, sad fact that in those days a person who wanted to disappear often could. Then, about 10 years ago, a breakthrough. The advent of new technology and digitized records had allowed the investigator to cross-reference old files. He found a name: a 17-year-old girl named Eleanor Vance, who had been reported as a runaway from a nearby town just a week before Leo was found. She had been a good student, a quiet girl from a strict religious family. And, the report noted, she had been secretly pregnant. The pieces began to fit. The investigator had tracked her family, but they had refused to speak to him. They claimed their daughter had shamed them and run off, and as far as they were concerned, she was gone. The report continued, painting a bleak picture. Eleanor had no money, no support. She had been utterly alone. The investigator had pieced together her movements in the weeks after she left him. She had taken a bus, then another, drifting from town to town, likely working odd jobs for cash. The trail was faint, a ghost's footprint on the world. But the investigator had been persistent. He finally found her. Or rather, he found her name. On a gravestone. Leo's heart stopped. He read the sentence again. Eleanor Vance had died just 3 years after he was born. She was only 20 years old. She had contracted pneumonia while living on the streets during a particularly harsh winter and had never recovered. She had died in a shelter, alone, and was buried in an unmarked grave in a city he had never heard of. But the report didn't end there. In Eleanor's few belongings, found in a tattered backpack at the shelter, was a small, worn notebook. It was a diary. The investigator had managed to get copies of the pages before they were discarded. And there, in the faint, spidery handwriting of a scared, heartbroken young woman, was the truth. She had been in love, a boy from school. When she told him she was pregnant, he had vanished. Her parents, horrified and ashamed, had given her an ultimatum: give the baby up for adoption through their church, or she was no longer their daughter. She had refused. She couldn't bear the thought of giving her child away to strangers, to never know what happened to him. So she ran. She had planned to raise him herself. But the reality of life on the run, with no money and a newborn baby, had been a crushing weight. In her final diary entry, written just a day before she left him, she wrote of her despair. The baby had a fever, and she had no money for a doctor. She was terrified he was going to die in her arms. She wrote that she was a failure, that she was dooming her beautiful, perfect son to a life of poverty and sickness. She couldn't do that to him. She had to give him a better chance than she could ever provide. And then came the final gut-wrenching sentences. She had been watching a car on her long walk down the road. She saw the couple inside. They looked kind. Their car was nice. She had noticed them a few days earlier in a nearby town, had seen them holding hands. They looked like good people. In a desperate, illogical act of faith, She decided they were the ones. She wrote that she would leave her son where they would find him. She prayed they would stop. She prayed they would take him and love him. She didn't abandon him to chance. She had, in her own desperate way, chosen them. She had picked Sarah and David. Leo closed the report. The room was utterly silent. The story he had been told, the story of a random, miraculous discovery, was both true and not true. He had not been thrown away. He had been placed with a hope and a prayer by a mother who loved him so much she had to give him away to save him. The weight of her sacrifice, the sheer, unimaginable tragedy of her short life settled over him. He felt an immense, overwhelming wave of sorrow for the young woman he had never known, for the mother who had given him life only to lose her own. He looked at Sarah. Her face was pale, her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles were white. The new reality was settling in for her too. She had not found a lost child. She had been given a sacred trust. A dying girl's final wish had been delivered into her arms on that rainy morning. For 28 years, she had unknowingly fulfilled that wish. She had loved him, protected him, and raised him, just as Eleanor had prayed she would. "She chose you," Leo said, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah could only nod, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, they were not adoptive mother and adopted son. They were two people bound together by the love and sacrifice of a third, a young woman whose tragic story was the silent, unseen foundation of their entire lives. The question of what family means had finally been answered. Family wasn't about blood. It wasn't about secrets or lies. It was about choice. Eleanor had made a choice born of desperation and love. Sarah and David had made a choice born of hope and compassion, and now Leo had to make his own. He could live in the shadow of the past, haunted by the tragedy of his origins, or he could honor the sacrifices of both his mothers by living the life they had dreamed for him. He thought of his father, David. He finally understood the depth of the man's love and foresight. David hadn't just wanted Leo to have money, he had wanted him to have the truth in all its painful, complicated glory. He knew that Leo couldn't be a whole person until he understood the full story of his existence. He had given him more than an inheritance, he had given him his identity. The resolution was not a simple, happy ending. It was something far more profound. It was a beginning. A new reality had dawned, one built not on a comfortable story, but on a difficult, heartbreaking, and ultimately beautiful truth. The wounds were deep, and the scars would remain. But for the first time, the family of Sarah and Leo, a family now connected by an invisible thread to a ghost named Eleanor, was complete. The question that lingered in the air, the one they would have to answer for the rest of their lives, was a simple one. How do you honor a life that was given so that yours could begin? The drive home from the lawyer's office was quiet, but it was a shared quiet. A silence of processing and mutual understanding. Leo glanced over at his mother, Sarah, who was staring out the passenger window, her reflection a ghostly image against the passing scenery. They had spent a lifetime together, and yet they were just getting to know each other for the first time. They were no longer a mother and son bound by a protective secret, but two people connected by a profound and tragic truth. The story of Leo's life wasn't just his anymore, it belonged to Sarah, to David, and to the memory of a brave, desperate young woman named Eleanor. When he got back to his apartment, Chloe was waiting. She didn't ask questions. She simply looked at his face and knew that everything had changed again. Leo sat down beside her on the couch, and for the second time in 24 hours, he told her the story of his life. But this time, the story had a beginning. He told her about Eleanor, about her diary, about her impossible choice. He handed her the investigator's report, and together they looked at the faded photograph of the young woman with sad, hopeful eyes, his first mother. There were tears, of course, tears for the girl who never got to see her son grow up, tears for the parents who had held a secret for so long, tears for the pain and misunderstanding that had almost torn their family apart. But through the sadness, there was also a sense of peace, a feeling of wholeness that had been missing for his entire life, even when he hadn't realized it. The empty space inside him, the one he had tried to fill with anger and resentment, was now filled with a new, complex understanding of love and sacrifice. A week later, Leo and Sarah drove 200 miles to a forgotten cemetery in a town they had never heard of. It took them nearly an hour to find the grave. It was in a quiet, overgrown corner of the cemetery, marked only by a small, numbered metal plaque, nearly swallowed by the grass. There was no name, just a number. Leo knelt down and cleared the grass away, his fingers tracing the cold metal. This was her, Eleanor Vance, the woman who had given him everything. Sarah stood beside him and placed a bouquet of bright yellow flowers, the color of his nursery, at the base of the marker. They didn't say much. There were no grand speeches or dramatic pronouncements. They just stood there, a son and a mother, paying their respects to another mother, their histories finally intertwined. Before they left, Leo made a phone call. He arranged for a proper headstone to be placed, one with her name, her dates, and a simple inscription, "A mother's love is a guiding light." Life, of course, did not magically go back to the way it was. The inheritance was transferred, but Leo and Chloe didn't rush to buy a house or start a business. The money felt different now. It wasn't just a financial tool, it was a legacy. It was the physical manifestation of his father's enduring love and his birth mother's ultimate sacrifice. They decided to put most of it into a trust, a foundation for their own future children, ensuring the story of love and protection would continue. The relationship between Leo and Sarah was forever changed. It was deeper now, more honest. The comfortable, easy dynamic of their past was gone, replaced by a more deliberate, thoughtful connection. They had to learn how to talk to each other again without the weight of the secret between them. There were moments of awkwardness and moments of profound connection. But for the first time, their love was built on a foundation of complete truth. And they both knew, with a quiet certainty, that it was stronger than it had ever been before. Dear viewers, this story, in the end, is about a question that every family faces in one way or another. Are the secrets we keep to protect the ones we love worth the risk of tearing them apart? Sarah and David believed they were doing the right thing, shielding their son from a painful truth, but in doing so, they created a fragile world that was destined to shatter. What's your take on this? Was Sarah right to keep the secret for 28 years, or should she have told him the truth much sooner? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm reading every single one. The story of Leo is a powerful reminder that family is not defined by blood or by birth, but by the choices we make. It's forged in moments of crisis, in acts of selfless sacrifice, and in the difficult, messy process of forgiveness. It's about choosing to love, choosing to protect, and ultimately choosing to trust one another with the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And if you thought this story was shocking, wait until you hear our next stories. For more true stories with unbelievable twists, make sure you subscribe and hit the like button. I'll see you in the next one. Always remember, at Virtuous Stories, we love you.